Part number 4 of Lunar Lunacy, and we're going to just have a review to try to catch everybody up. And I've had some folks to say they've appreciated the review on it. And also, I was answering a question. The person who asked it last week is not here. I'm going to just go ahead and deal with it anyway, because I spent time in study with that. Always seems to go that way, but we're going to deal with the particular question on why is this important and what is God doing with this? And I think that if you see this against history, just marking where the full moon is and what God did at the full moon, you will come to appreciate the moon even more than you do. Now, we looked at the phases of the moon, we named them, and the moon has about 29 to 30 days where it marks off 1 month. Now, God works throughout the course of even the solar year for Israel with the lunar year. And he, about every 3 to 6 and then 9 years, he adds another month, a 13th month, and it catches everybody up so that by the time you start the feasts of Jehovah, which are lunar feasts, by the way, feasts that are centered around the full moon and the 15th day of specific months, then you come to realize that God has a program for the nation of Israel and has had a program and markers using the moon since the creation of Adam. We named those, we saw that. And let's just go back quickly then to the first month of the first year in the recreation. You have the first 6 days of recreation here, and then God rested on the 7th day. From that point onward, you have things happening that are very, very important and significant around the moon. So that if you know the phase of the moon, especially the full moon, you know that certain things happen. And again, when this person asked, why is this important? You know what I can say? On the first month, on the 15th day of the month of the first year of human history, when Adam was created, something happened on that day marked by the full moon. And that was the sin nature began to be passed to all men. That's the significance of that day. And God used the moon as a faithful witness in the sky. And throughout history, he does that. He keeps track of years, he keeps track of months, and he keeps track of the 15th day where the full moon is in the sky. But there are other things that surround this matter of the full moon. For example, on the 10th day, we believe that Eve talked with the snake or the serpent in the Garden of Eden at the fig tree. That's where he first addressed her. And the fig tree becomes significant, and the 10th day becomes important as history moves on. And in fact, whenever the Lord Jesus Christ was going to Jerusalem to be crucified, he cursed the fig tree on the 10th day. And so that's why we know that that 10th day is important. But then you begin coming toward the 14th day of the month. We're going to come right on in, kind sir. That's all right, no problem. We're in Exodus chapter 12. And on the 14th day of that first month of the first year is when Adam and Eve sinned. Now that's the day that later on is going to become Passover. That's the day that later on Jesus Christ is going to die on the cross. So a lot of things surround the keeping of time by God. And then this 15th day, Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden. And that night, underneath the full moon, there was the first human conception, and that of Eve. And we went through, and we'll do that again, the fact that ovulation was just right at that time for her to conceive Cain. But now we're going to move through history, and we're going to see then that thousands of years later, Israel moved out of Egypt surrounding the full moon. And here we are in Exodus chapter 12, and let's review that one more time. And see that in verse number 2, God said to Moses, and he related it to Israel, "This month shall be the beginning of months." Now, this is Aviv or Nisan, and this particular month was very, very important because it was the month whereby they would begin to calculate the feast of Jehovah, starting with Passover. So up until this particular point, God was utilizing this same scheme of things, this same schedule, but he reiterates it especially with Israel because all of his feasts, everything that he wants them to do, are going to surround the moon and an agricultural schedule. So it says, "It shall be the first month of the year to you." Then it says in verse 3, "On the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them a lamb, and they'll keep it up," then it says, until verse 6, "The 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation shall kill it in the evening." And so on this day, you have the Passover. You pick the lamb on the 10th day of the first month. Now, remember, we believe that Eve began the process of picking the serpent as her leader, the serpent as her god, and the fig tree, which represents sheer religion. It is a religion without a relationship, or attempting to be self-righteous or good without God. And she began to buy into this evil. Evil, yes, it has a dark side. Evil has a bad side. But in actuality, it's the tree of the knowledge of human good called evil. And so many people believe in God, even believe in the Bible, but they have no relationship with the God of the Bible by faith in Jesus Christ alone, because they're trying to work their way to heaven and that sort of thing, attempting to reform or be a good person or turn over a new leaf and all those things that accompany religion. Where was that founded? Back there in the Garden of Eden with the fig tree. The big cover-up, as it were. On the 14th, on the 10th, they were to pick the lamb. On the 14th, they were to kill the lamb in conjunction with what happened in the first month, the 14th day of that month when Adam and Eve sinned. By the 15th, then, Israel was out of Egypt. Let's go to Numbers chapter 33. Numbers chapter 33. And it says there in verse number 3, "And they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month. On the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand, and they had 3 encampments. One on the night of the 15th, they went, verse 5, from Ramses to Succoth. Verse 6, then, this is the 16th, they went from Succoth to Etham. On the 17th, then, they went from Etham to Pihahiroth. And verse 8 tells us from that point they passed through the midst of the Red Sea. So they did that on the evening of the 18th. Now, what's the significance of this? Why is this so important? Because we're not going to do that at this particular moment, but because the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is modeled by this, the exodus of Egypt. Jesus Christ did not die on Friday. That does not give 3 24-hour periods. And that's what it says in Matthew chapter 12. The only way possible for this to be literally fulfilled is to have 3 12-hour periods called night, and 3 12-hour periods called days, and then joining them together in 3 literal 24-hour periods. Let's go to this one. In Matthew chapter 12, verse number 40. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And so therefore, Jesus died at 3 o'clock on Wednesday. And you remember the Jewish day goes from 6 p.m. here to 6 p.m. here, rather than midnight to midnight like we do. And so the Lord Jesus Christ died at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, was in the tomb by 6 o'clock, but 6 o'clock starts Thursday. And so you have all day Thursday, all day Friday, and all day Saturday. And on the first day of the week, the Lord Jesus Christ was resurrected from the grave, and that was on a Sunday. Now, again, this is extremely important because of what Christianity has turned the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ into. A travesty, actually. They say that he died on Friday, which he did not. He died on Wednesday. Then they say that Maundy, Thursday is the time when he washed the disciples' feet. That is not true. Even saying that he came into Jerusalem on a time called Palm Sunday. Now, he came into Jerusalem, all right. They laid the palms in front of him, but that was on Friday the 9th. Because on Saturday the 10th, Jesus Christ cursed the fig tree. And it's simple to trace that down. But again, as I said, that's not going to be what we're going to do now. What we're going to do at this point is go back to the book of Exodus. Back to the book of Exodus, chapter 12. And note a couple of things as to how meticulous God is. In chapter 12, we have in verse number 40, something told us there that's very, very important. It says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the selfsame day. Now that selfsame day was the 15th day of the first month, wherein there was a full moon. Now the Exodus occurred here. And therefore, all we have to do is look back in history to see that there was another event that happened on the same day, the first month, the 15th day of that month. And that, of course, was the covenant given to Abraham. Now, how do we know these particular years? You can take the Bible and go through. Here, we're at the top of this list now. And the first dispensation. Now, you say, Pastor, what about the dispensation of innocence? I ask you the question. How long was the dispensation of innocence? 14 days. After Adam sinned, was he innocent? No, he was guilty. And he became guilty on the 14th day of the month. Now, we can show you how God, at the end of 1,656 years, begins to show us in reverse order from the full moon outward that this particular pattern is absolutely true. But again, that is not what we're dealing with tonight. So you've got 1,656 years plus 14 days of that, plus another 427 years of the dispensation of human government, totaling 283 years to the Abrahamic covenant. Now, that's how many years transpired during human history. From day one of month one of year one, when Adam was created, moving through history to the time when Abraham got his covenant, to the dispensation of promise. So you're holding your place here. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. So now we know that it was another marker. This is the reason for the full moon. This is the reason for that day. Because the moon is that faithful witness. God's program is a lunar program. And so therefore, he keeps coming back and doing things on this particular day that will help us to know and to understand that well, here's the month. And here's the year. And so in eternity future, if somebody says, well, when did you give the Abrahamic covenant? He can go back and flip through the pages. He can say, here's where year one was, and all the years through there to this particular point. And at the full moon of the first month of this year, I gave the Abrahamic covenant. And so it says, verse 1, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house to a land I'll show you. I'll make of you a great nation, and so forth. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Now this is also important because Semiramis in Babylon was that goddess, we had been studying her, who took the moon as her sign. Abraham came out of a city that worshiped the moon. And God often will do things, just he's got a great sense of humor, just to frustrate people, takes the very object of their worship and makes it a faithful witness for his cause. So here he calls Abraham out and into the land when there is this full moon. And he documents it by that year, that month, that day, and that full moon as the faithful witness. And so, therefore, we can go forward here, back to Exodus chapter 12. And it says, it came to pass, in verse number 41, it came to pass at the end of 430 years, the selfsame day it came to pass that all of the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. And so you simply add the 430 years, and you come to another year. And that is 2,513 years later, added to the original. And what happened then? The Exodus. On what day? The day of the full moon, on the very first month of that particular year. And the very same thing is going to happen with regard to the manna ending. And that's what we're going to look at in just a little bit. And that's an extra 40 years to it. So it's year number 2,553, starting from the first onward. So here's how it's going to go. The Abrahamic covenant, year 2083. Now, this, of course, is, like I said, starting from year one onward. And all three of these dates were the first month, the 15th day of the month, under the full moon. The Abrahamic covenant came, the Exodus came, and the manna ceased. Now, one other thing's important. We have two other months, actually the second month and the third month, around which God did something the 15th day of those months. And so we're going to look at that and then look at Joshua. Okay, let's come to the book of Exodus chapter 16. And so it says, and they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after departing out of the land of Egypt. Now, these documentations are more than a mere mistake, or God is just simply giving us something to read. They are allowing us to see that God has a time schedule. And that God does something on certain days, and he can go back and reference those days. And he can say, on this day, this happened. And I've got my faithful witness in the sky, the moon, to let you know, that 15th day of the month. And so they arrived on that 15th day there, which was a Saturday. Now, how do we know it was a Saturday or a Sabbath day? Well, let's look down at verse 4. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I might prove them. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather, because on the 7th day then they're not supposed to gather anything. That first day, counting down of the 6th day, starts on the morning of the 16th. 5, 6, and here's the 7th day. If the 7th day is a Sabbath, you can go on back. The 15th has to be a Sabbath day. It's the fifth. But what happened on this day? What was so great that God did this? Here is heaven, and here is earth, and here are the angels, and God did something for Israel and opened the very doors of heaven and the windows of heaven and rained down manna on the earth. Now, what is manna? Angel food. And so, therefore, this is important. He's marked this down because any angel who knows anything about God's provision and his angel eating this manna knows now that there is a day when God started feeding men with angel food. Significance. God is beginning the process of replacing angels with men on earth. Angels are becoming the servants of men on earth. And the chosen nation that he has, out of which he is going to pick these men to sit on these thrones that used to be occupied by angels, is the nation of Israel. No other nation got fed with manna, but Israel did. And the full moon marked the time when God said this is going to happen, and the very next day it started. Look at verse number 7. In the morning then you'll see the glory of the Lord. He's heard your murmurings. In the evening you're going to get, verse 8, flesh to eat, in the morning bread to the full. And if you'll come on down here then to verse number 26. 6 days you'll gather it, but on the 7th day, which is Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And so that's what they did. Verse 29. He giveth you on the 6th day bread of 2 days, abide ye every man in his place, let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Now, here's the point. God had the full moon to mark when he promised that the manna would start. The very next day, the 16th, the manna started. Now let's go to the book of Joshua. 40 years later. And Joshua is going to take the people from the west side of Jordan across to the east side into Canaan land. And once they get in there, God begins to tabulate days one more time. And these days are important because just as there was a start to the manna, there is going to be a stop to the manna. And just as the moon indicated God's promise to begin, and it began the next day, the moon is going to indicate God's promise to stop, and the next day they're going to eat of the food of the promised land. And it stops on the 15th day of the first month that they enter the land 40 years later. Okay, let's read it. Verse number 19. And the people came up out of Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped at Gilgal. and the east border of Jericho. This is Joshua chapter 4, verse 19. Joshua chapter 4, verse 9. You'll have to forgive me. My brain was electrified. I'm now on a much higher plane than other folks. I've gone to the seventh or eighth dimension, and Doc, you weren't here, but I got shocked when lightning struck our house. So, bolt out of the blue. Yeah, thanks a lot. Brother. Okay. By the way, you noticed, when did the children of Israel come into the promised land? The 10th day of the first month, they crossed Jordan. They're moving from a wilderness experience into the land where God is going to dwell. Remember, they're turning their back on the fig tree, mere religion, hopefully, and they're looking toward an actual relationship with God. And this Jordan crossing, there's great significance here. We could spend a whole lot of time there, putting the 12 stones in the Jordan River, putting the 12 stones in Gilgal, and so forth. The whole event is Israeli in nature, but it's for Jews who are truly saved and want to get in there and develop that land for God, who was going to live among them and dwell among them. And it was on that 10th day that they went in there. However, let's note that some things happened before they got into or continued on into Israel, into the land. Verse 2 in chapter 5. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make thee a sharp knife. Circumcise again the children of Israel the second time." Joshua made a sharp knife, circumcised the children of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And for this cause, Joshua did circumcise. All the people that came out of Egypt that were males, the men of war, died in the wilderness. Verse 5, now all the people that came out were circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness that came forth out of Egypt were not circumcised. So, before they could enter the land, what is the mark of the covenant? Circumcision. It's household salvation. You're cut off from your people if you don't have this mark. And now this people, God wants to develop as a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, people that are not a threat to his righteousness. And so the very first thing they've got to do before they have his blessing to march further to conquer that land is every male must be circumcised, just like the Abrahamic covenant calls for. And so you have they enter on day 10, the 11th day, the 12th day, and the 13th day. They circumcise and heal. Now let's look. Verse number 6. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness till all the people that were men of war which came out of Egypt were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord, unto whom the Lord sware that he would not show them the land. All right, but their children, whom he raised up in their stead, them Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not circumcised them by the way. All right, now once the reproach, verse 9, of Egypt was rolled away, note what they did, verse 10, on the 14th day of that month. Remember, this is the first month, 40 years later. And it's coordinated with the very same month that they came out 40 years later of Egypt. And so all the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month in evening at the plains of Jericho. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover. Now, if the Passover is the 14th day, what did they do on the 15th day? Well, the manna then is going to cease, note verse number 12, And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. The 15th day they ate of the old corn. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. And if you'll go back, note one more time in the bottom part of verse 11 where it says the selfsame day. It's real important. Because when you see those things, God is trying to draw attention to that particular day. And it's always the day of the full moon. So, on the just like when he had manna in the first place, on the 15th day he promised it. On the 16th day it started. 40 years later, on the 15th day, he said it's going to end. And on the 16th day, it ended, and they started eating of the new corn of the land flowing with milk and honey. And God started providing from the land, this second generation coming in. Okay, now, let's take a look at this one more time in the flow of history. As we're moving down, we see that in year 2083, on the first month, the 15th day of the month, God gave the Abrahamic covenant. When you look at the moon, and Diana mentioned that I think we're approaching the time of the full moon, I don't know, but people are beginning to act a little funny, a little squirrely, things are happening and that sort of thing as we're approaching this full moon. We'll get into even more reasons why later, but you got to find out this before anything. It was a full moon when God said, I'm going to form a people that are going to take this earth and govern it. Now, what does that mean for fallen angels? They're out. What does that mean for demons? They're out. What does that mean for unbelievers? They're out. So when that full moon comes up, I believe that it's innate. I believe there's something even subconscious, and that there's a knowing that moon means, as a faithful witness, that God gave a covenant to a man, and he is not going to welch on his promise. And then that moon also says that God demonstrated his power of bringing his people out of the world system when he brought Israel out of Egypt under the full moon 430 years later, the selfsame day. And then 40 years later, the selfsame day, marked by that moon, the manna ceased. And so the angels know, and the demons know, and anybody, even unsaved people who read the Bible, know that for 40 years God took care of the nation of Israel, and that even through the tribulation period, he can feed them and protect them and guard them and see them through if they are faithful to him. And just like that second generation, cross the river Jordan and enter the land, or enter the kingdom. Okay. Now, this is why all this is very important, that full moon. But let's consider something else in going back to Genesis chapter 12. I'm not going to push this with any amount of 100% confidence in this teaching, okay? But I believe that we can generally see God's dealings with Abraham under that full moon and some things that happened with him. In the year 2008, the city in Ur, to worship the moon, Abraham was born. Now, when you're born, you are 0 years old. You're only a few hours old or days old and that sort of thing. But in keeping with this, if we're going back of the selfsame day, he was born the first month of the year 2008 on the 15th day. Now, this is why I say that. When he gave the Abrahamic covenant, note in verse number 4 of chapter 12. And Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Now, I'll show you why I believe that was his birthday. When he departed, God is indicating that on that self-same day, Abraham turned 75. Now, we can know this if you'll come to chapter number 17. "24 years later, 2001-7, that was the year, Abram had a birthday. And that birthday was on the 15th day of the first month. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to him." Now, what happened on this day? Well, if you'll look at verse number 23, "And Abraham took Ishmael and all that were born in his house and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abram's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day." Now, have we heard that phrase before, selfsame day? Throughout all of this, it was the 15th, it's the selfsame day, the selfsame day, the selfsame day. God is giving us a key phrase here that is linking us with that full moon on the first month of the first day. Abraham came out or rather departed for the land on that day, got the covenant. Therefore, if we're looking back, if indeed he was born on that day, we just go back. That's when he was 75 years old, we go back. 24 more years, we go forward. Now, again, please remember that in order to keep coordinated with the solar year, Israel and God added a second month called, a second 12th month called the second Adar, which is their 12th month. So we believe that this is in keeping with, precise keeping with the lunar schedule. So what happened? Here we are in chapter 17 and verse 24. "And Abraham was 90 years old and 9 when he was circumcised in the flesh, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old." Verse 26, "In the self same day Abraham circumcised." So there we have another reference to it. Now, why is it important? Because God can go right back to that year, can go right back to the day, and say this is when this event happened. And by the way, there are only so many times during the course. We believe that God has allowed 7,000 years of human history. There are only 12 full moons a year, making 84,000 full moons. And all he has to do is keep tab of the year and keep tab of the month and the day. And that's exactly what he's doing. So there he is. He was circumcised there at 99 years of age. Now, come with me to chapter 18. And the book of Genesis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Now, if this was the 15th day of the first month when Abraham was circumcised, he was 99. Now, something's going to happen when he turns 100 on the selfsame day. "The Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and 3 men were there." We know that story generally, how they ate. But here's what we want to get to. Verse number 9 says, "Where is Sarah thy wife?" And he said, "Behold, in the tent. I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son." Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well stricken in years, and so forth. Now, despite that fact, the Lord said, verse 14, At the appointed time, I will return unto you according to the time of life, 9 months, and Sarah's going to have a son. Now remember, time is marching on here as we're moving on from when Abraham was circumcised in that first month, the 15th day, on his birthday. He was 99, and time is moving on toward another year, about 3 months. I think let's 1, 2. Now we want to move it. We want to move it one more, hopefully here. All right, yeah. So we got 1, 2, 3 months. Now, between the time that Abraham was circumcised and the time that God visited Sarah, about 3 months elapsed. In chapter 18 here, we have the story that Abraham is dwelling in the plains of Mamre. The Lord visits him and says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 19 is the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to chapter 20, verse 1, and Abraham is journeying, and he comes to the region of a man by the name of Abimelech in verse number 3. And Abimelech takes Sarah to wife. And God says to Abimelech, behold, verse 3, you're a dead man, for the woman that you have taken, she is a man's wife. And Abimelech had not come near her, and so forth, and that saved his life. What can you imagine if Abimelech and Sarah had relations? Then there would have always been doubt as to the seed coming forth from Sarah. It had to be Abraham's seed. Therefore, she could not know any other man but Abraham. And so God is protecting Abimelech and Abraham and Sarah. Now, about 3 months have transpired, chapter 21. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. Remember, I'm going to return according to the time of life. I'm going to return according to a set time, a set schedule. I'm going to return at such a time where the full moon actually is going to record a tremendous event. And so Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. And Abraham called the name of that son Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son on the 8th day as God commanded him. Note verse 5. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So we've got, let's just move on down here. We've got 1 month, we've got 2 months. Hopefully my calculations are right. 3, 4, we're going from the 15th to the 15th, 5, 6, 7th month, 8th month, and then coming back over here to the 15th day of the month is the 9th month. Surely I don't have to explain to you the birds and the bees as to how long human gestation takes. On the first month, the 15th day of the month, Abraham's birthday, he turned 100 years of age. Guess who was born to him? Isaac. Now, if our calculations are right and true, like I said, I'm not trying to push the others. I can push easily. This is just something interesting, at least interesting to me. If you don't like it, I enjoyed it, so that's all I care about. All right. So, in answering to the question given, why does God do all of this? Simply because the moon is a faithful witness. And you can calculate the years, and he keeps tab of the months. He keeps tabs of the days. He documents them in the scripture so that from the birth of Abraham to the covenant of Abraham to the circumcision of Abraham to the birth of Isaac's son, that full moon is a witness. And then we can go from the Abrahamic covenant to the Egyptian exodus to the time when the manna was promised on that second month, but it's actually 40 total years from the first month to the next first month, 40 years later, when on the 15th day, the manna ceased under the new moon.